There is something about an Advent wreath that is undeniably domestic. Surely, once we've left our childhood catechesis, a mature adult Christian doesn't need an Advent wreath to nurture her faith. Nevertheless, with all of my children grown, and sometimes in a last-minute flurry of shopping for the right set of candles, I always make sure that there is an Advent wreath in my home. This simple domestic rite works to change things. In the hustle of a busy season, when I light these candles, I pause, and it comes rushing back to me. The power of the light of Christ, and by extension, the opportunity and the awesome responsibility that I have to be light for others. St. Paul certainly knew about the power of Christ's light. I mean, it knocked him to the ground. And this week in the church, we read a bit of Paul's letter to one of his beloved communities, but it was written from a dark place. It was written from prison, where Paul awaited a trial and possibly his own execution. But the letter is not anxious. It does not express despair. It is suffused with joy. In the passage we hear today, he writes of confidence, of joy and rejoicing, of affection, of love, of wisdom, because Paul could see from his dark prison that the good news that he had preached would persist. These disciples that he had brought to Christ and nurtured were in fact true partners in the gospel. Paul knew the word of God would not be chained or bound. It would not be thwarted. He took a long view and saw that it was good. Today, a week into Advent, we're looking ahead just a little to the incarnation of the Christ with us. And even as we look ahead, there are recent events that shape our lives in church and society that have come just to the end of their beginnings. The multi-year global synod on synodality called by Pope Francis has concluded. We await discoveries about how or whether the church and the world will indeed be, as Francis called it to be, a church truly for the third millennium. And in the United States, here in November, the elections are behind us. Regardless of what lies ahead, some have learned, to some's chagrin, that we may be as divided a nation as we are united a nation. At any times when we have more questions than answers, it would not be surprising for some to wish that they could just see a path in places where they might only see a wilderness. And many of us might ask, what shall I do? John the Baptist proclaims a way and a place and a time. As Advent started, we began our year of Luke, and it is the evangelist Luke, and only Luke, who intentionally gives a location to John the Baptist. Luke gives John parents who have stories of their own. He gives him this family and a backstory so that before we hear this beautiful comparison of John to that poetic voice in Isaiah crying out, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight God's paths." Before that, we hear a recitation of the names and locations of imperial, state, local, and religious power. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, and so on and so forth, until we arrive at John, to whom the task of preparing the way for the Messiah had come. Not to any of these named political, economic, and religious powers. To John, this rather domestically imagined Lukan John, the John who leaped in his mother Elizabeth's womb when her relative Mary, the God-bearer, drew near. And it is in Luke's gospel, just a few verses further along from today's, that John, in the manner of the Christ for whom he prepares the way, in his preaching and teaching compassionately reaches across the aisle and baptizes even tax collectors, shunned because they worked for the Roman occupiers, the other side. And furthermore, when John is preaching and the crowds question him, "What ought we to do?" he exhorts them, be kind, be equitable, care for the poor, here and now. That is John proclaiming the good news. So what do we do then, this Lukan Advent, to prepare a way in the desert? We can, like Paul, see and seek reasons to rejoice and share them. And we can keep kindling even the smallest and most domestic lights. In our time and our place, we can be true partners in the gospel.